Marhaba and welcome to Free Palestine Pod, the podcast. I'm Lama Bazzari.
And I'm Lina Hadi. Each week, we will bring you in-depth commentary from Palestine.
Let's talk Palestine. Today on the show, we welcome the globally recognized and one of the most distinguished Palestinian artists, Sliman Mansour, who is well known as a pioneer in Arab art with his exceptional and comprehensive portfolio revolving around the continued revival of Palestinian identity, as it captures images rooted in the land, its people, and its struggle against the occupation. Mansour is also an illustrator, art instructor, and author, and has contributed greatly to art education and promotion within Palestine. Marhaba Sliman, such an honor and pleasure having you on our show today. And welcome to Free Palestine Pod. Let's talk Palestine.
Let's talk Palestine. Thank you, Lama. Thank you, Lina.
I want to start with your childhood. And you were born in Birzeit in 47, a year before our Nakba. How was your childhood and how did this period shape and inspire your passion for the arts?
Well, my childhood was like most of the people here. I mean, most of the people were living in poverty. We lacked many things at that time. But anyway, it was a beautiful time because Birzeit was a small village. It has a lot of olive groves around it and whatever, and natural springs with swimming pools. And it was like paradise for me to live in that area. And of course, it affected my art afterwards, you know. You see, if you look at my art, you see a lot of olive groves and olive trees and landscape, and it's all affected by my childhood. Also many other things, you know. When I worked in mud, I remember this when I was a child, I used to help my grandmother to do things in mud, like beehives and ovens for baking bread and so on. So when I thought about natural materials to do my art, I immediately thought about my grandmother and how and the time I used to help her doing things in mud.
Mr. Mansour, it's amazing that you have managed to become such an iconic Palestinian artist, but you've actually been practicing in your domain for a very long time. Considering that the entirety of your career, you're the same age as my Khala Muhammad, considering that your entire career was basically under colonial occupation, how is it that you were able to exercise your art? Usually people have to come from a wealthy family to be able to exercise art under these type of circumstances. Was that your case? How were you able to exercise your art?
I studied in an Israeli art school. I mean, after the war in 67. So I broke the wall of fear between me and the Israelis. And they, at that time, they tolerated art and criticizing and talking and painting and so on. Not so much, but not like now. Now it's becoming really dangerous for influential people, artists or whatever. But during the time I was working, criticism and artistic methods and so on. So that's why I think, and although I was imprisoned twice at that time, but not really a prison, you know, it's like interrogation. And I think they did that to terrorize me more than to imprison me. And many of my paintings were confiscated. And also a lot of my posters were confiscated. And the people who were selling them, they were fined and they were taken to prison. So it wasn't so much easy, you know, all the time. And once I did an exhibition in 1980, and the exhibition lasted only 6 hours. And then they came in and they took the keys of the gallery and they closed it. They forbade us to use certain colors in art, like red, green, black, and white. It's funny now, but that's what happened at that time. and they forbade us to make any exhibition in the occupied territories unless we had to give our paintings to the military censorship to give us permission to exhibit. Of course, we didn't do that. So it was really hard for us to do any exhibition in the West Bank. We did most of our exhibitions in universities only, among the students and so on, not to the main public. But we also were free to do whatever we want in Jerusalem, in Nazareth, in the Galilee, and so on, but not in the occupied territories as they put it.
How did you deal with that psychologically as an artist? I mean, it sounds almost as if you were, as Khalid Jarrah described it, in a prison within a prison. I mean, you can't even exercise your own passion. I mean, you can't exercise your profession, which is art, and you're limited to certain colors, and you have to get things approved by the Israeli government. What was that like? I mean, I can imagine very challenging, but how was that emotionally?
Well, it was hard, really hard, to work under these circumstances. But we, as a union in the occupied territories, were very courageous, and we, even some artists, they wanted to confront the military by showing very, very strong messages in art and so on. And some artists, they wanted their art to be confiscated even. Sometimes it brought fame for them. Newspapers were right and so on. But anyway, that was not the reason. Artists were very courageous, and also we had some support from international artists and also from Israeli progressive artists. So we thought, in a way, we have a backing, and this also encouraged us to do whatever we wanted to do. What can I say? I mean, it was hard, but we did it. And now when I look back at what we did, I really think that we were really courageous. I'm proud of that. And I'm proud because I was one of the founders of the union in the occupied territories, and I was the first head of that union in 1979. I also helped a lot to create a kind of infrastructure for art in the occupied territories. Like, besides the union, we opened also some makatib, some offices for this union in Gaza and in Hebron and in Ramallah. Also, I helped in establishing one of the most important art centers in Jerusalem. It was called Al-Wasiti. And in Al-Wasiti, we established Archive Bank for Palestinian art. Now this bank is in Al-Hosh institution in Jerusalem. I'm proud that we did that because we started something we needed it as a cultural movement to make an archive for artists in a certain time. But this archive, it needs all the time to be. Every year we have to do it again and again because new things come up every year. We couldn't do that, but we did until 1998. We did even from the 50s and 60s and 70s, and we did that bank. Also, we, as old artists from the 70s and 80s, we established something called the New Vision Group that was based on the vision of the first Intifada, which is to boycott Israeli products and not to buy any artistic materials from Israel, and to create our own materials from nature or from what we find around us. And that was a very important thing for the development of Palestinian art. It became the link that Palestinian art before the first Intifada and what's being done today, and contemporary art today. The New Vision was the link that put these two periods together. I think.
Thank you. You would have been 20 years old during the 1967 Six-Day War. What is your recollection of that period, and how did this resonate through your art and the evolution of your creative expression? Specifically because your beautiful work focuses on identity, land, and people. And there was so much upheaval during that time.
Because I was born in 1947, and after that, we became part of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And so until 1967, I used to think, and all my age, I think, we used to think that we are Jordanians. We didn't think that we are Palestinians and so on, because in school and everywhere, it's the Hashemite Kingdom and King Hussein everywhere, in reading books in the school and even in the cinema everywhere. So we didn't have a strong sense of identity as Palestinians. After 1967, we became little by little aware of our identity. And then not only artists, visual artists, but also in literature and in all parts and all expression of art. Palestinian identity was a main subject because the Israelis, they denied, until now, they deny our existence. They deny the existence of the Palestinian people because for them it's easy to deny. They deny the Nakba, they deny the existence of us. So searching for identity was a main subject for Palestinian artists. And because identity is an abstract subject, it's not something that we can see. So we started searching for ideas from several sources, like old art from the area, from Canaanite art or Egyptian or Assyrian from Mesopotamia. We took from that period. And of course, that was the reason that the Israelis, they always brought history in their discussion about the political situation. So we thought that why don't we take from Canaanite art? We believe that we are part of the Canaanite people, and we are part of the whole area, the culture of the whole area. That was one source. Another source was Islamic art. Of course, we took from Islamic art only the calligraphy. Everybody loved the calligraphy, not even as something you can read, but as a visual thing more. And then we also were influenced by folk art, from Palestinian customs to Palestinian architecture in the villages to the landscape. The landscape, because with all the trees and the stone walls that are built in the around the villages and so on, it's like an artwork. And our grandfathers did that. They were really artists, And also we were influenced also by modern symbols of freedom and anti-occupation and so on, like the pigeon, like the barbed wires, like all the prison symbols and so on. We use that, any image that we thought make people feel that we were very much interested in influencing people. And we used to think about ourselves as we were the spearhead of the revolution as young artists and so on. And we wanted to reach every house. So we thought about printing our artwork as posters. And we really did that because in a short time, most Palestinian houses were full of posters of Palestinian art. And that was really a good success thing that we did.
Everything you're describing is very much activism. So basically, while you were an artist, you were also an activist, and art was your medium. It sounds like what you're saying. It was your medium of getting the movement going. It's nonverbal communication by having those posters in every Palestinian home, it's a way of saying we exist, and we do this through our artwork. That is extremely noble, and as you know, I'm an activist and have been since I was a teenager, so
Yes.
I understand exactly what you're talking about. And I mean, I would love to see all of these posters. I was just with a film producer earlier, and he said to me that he has recently purchased 2 of your posters. So I didn't even know that they were available online, but I can't wait to see them. I'm more familiar with your more recent work over the last maybe 20 years, 30 years, which I find extremely impressive. I actually work in the contemporary art field, and I'm completely perplexed by the fact that we have almost no Levantine artists represented over the last 100 years in the West. And I mean, especially the United States and in Central Europe also. And I feel like it's almost as if imperialism has even played into our art. They've denied, our narrative. And so with all of your experience and being an activist and an artist, and really one of the most iconic Palestinian artists, what can we do to kind of spearhead this movement and get our narrative and our artists over the last 100 years into the West? What would you advise?
I think first of all, we have to be good artists. This is the only bridge that we can use to reach the whole world, not only the West. We have to know the language of the contemporary artists and contemporary people so that we can reach them. It's not easy, but it needs work, a lot of work, and a lot of look. I always tell my students, because I taught art for so many years in universities and schools and so on. I always tell my students that you cannot convince other people of your narrative in art, of your art, unless you really belong to what you do. If you really belong, that you are a Palestinian person, not only like your father or grandfather, but you really belong in, culturally and historically, that you are part of these people, and you love that, then you can convince your people, and then the whole world, that your art is sincere and good. But if you do that without love, then you can't convince anybody. And love makes you make good art, I think.
How is the art scene evolved, in your opinion, in the last few decades within Palestine?
Our problem is that there is no good documentation for, about Palestinian art, not only in the last 2 decades, but from the beginning of the 20th century, where I believe that art started to become part of our culture. There is no real documentation, and there is no real study about that. But the narrative that we talk about art is that through the influence of the British and the West, and also, sometimes through icon painters, that talented Palestinian people got to know and learn from. Palestinian art movement started in the early 20th century. And then in the 20s, several artists went to study in Italy and in France, like Sophie Halabi and Hanna Mismar. They studied art, but still, until the Al Nakba, I think most Palestinian artists, even those who studied in France or in Europe, they always mixed their art with handicraft. And like Hanna Mismar, he introduced himself as the potter, the pot maker. And Sophie Halabi, she introduced herself as the postcard maker. And others, we have another one who introduced himself as the carving. He carved the chairs for the salons and for the sitting room and so on. But they were painters, but they always mixed between the two together, between the handicraft and the art. After 1948, and after Al Nakba, which influenced everybody, It influenced everything, not only art, but all aspects of the people. So after 1948, artists like Ismail Shammout and his wife, Tamam Lakhadi, started introducing politics in their art. And from that day, politics became a very important part of our art. And it influenced our art a lot. In the early 50s, artists showed refugees and hopeless people without any shelter, without any help, and poor people. At the end of the 50s and the beginning of the 60s until now, artists started painting something like nostalgic art about the good old life that they used to live in the villages and in Jaffa and in Haifa, Akko, everywhere. So it was kind of nostalgic art, and until now, artists are doing it until now. In the mid 60s, the PLO started to work, and they established Center for Visual Art. The head of that center was Ismail Shammout. And from that day, Ismail Shammout and many other artists started showing the Palestinian hero as very as strong and fighting. He stopped to be poor and hopeless anymore. In the 70s, in the early 70s and so on, Palestinian artists started to get influenced, especially those who are outside in Syria and Lebanon and in Iraq. They started to be influenced by the art schools in these countries, and especially calligraphy and art and so on. But in the occupied territories here, we didn't have any influence from anywhere. Even getting books, it was very hard to get books, and we didn't have internet to see whatever the world was doing. So we started working on the vision or on the idea of identity, and we concentrated on that subject. We didn't get any influences from anywhere. I think this work of the identity subject kind of give us a kind of identity as artists, So anybody who can look at Palestinian art, he will know that this is Palestinian art, because the subject is always about identity and so on. In the first Intifada, as I said, we wanted to break out of this, of the identity subject.
So basically, whereas most artists historically have always been influenced by other artists, usually ones that are older than them, because you had no access to books, because you had no access, well, to internet or to any information of what was happening outside of occupied Palestine. Your group from that time period all just created their own, you decided during the 60s, we will be producing posters during the 70s, and then maybe in the 90s, at the end of the 80s, we're going to be
Yes.
happy Palestinians and fighters rather than the miserable, poor refugee Palestinians that we were in the 70s. That is so fascinating. Were you a group that worked together? I mean, because you were teaching, that you were able to disseminate these time periods, or was it just a group of you getting together, or was it just the climate? Whereas we were the miserable Palestinian refugees, and became, fida'in, like a little.
Yes, we started the union with 18 artists in the West Bank and Gaza. Of course, now there are more than 300 artists living in the West Bank and Gaza, but at that time they were only 18. It was a small group that we could meet anytime and anywhere without any problem. So you can say that we were like a close group. We were all friends, and we discussed art, and we helped each other with ideas, with whatever we can. Of course, we had some influence from the Palestinian artists living in Israel. So our friendship and connection with these artists, it helped us to open our eyes a little bit more. But with Israeli art, we had like a psychological wall. We didn't want to look at Israeli art and to be influenced by Israeli art. So maybe we got some influence from Israeli art through the Palestinian artists living in Israel, because they studied all in Israeli institutions and so on. But I don't think we actually were influenced by Israeli art at all. And for artists, it's very important to get influences from here and there, to get ideas, to know what other artists are doing, to be part of this art movement in the whole world. It's very important to be part of it. And also it helps your art. It opens your mind to do many things that you never thought of. Of course, we had some influences from Palestinian artists coming and visiting us during the 70s and 80s. Like Kemal Bulata, he visited us several times, and we became friends, and we discussed art with each other. And he was a great person to discuss art with. Sami Halabi came several times here. And I think Nasser Soumi came, and Samir Salami used to come every now and then. These people, they helped us to know more about art in the world until the 90s, when we have the internet, and it was easy for us after the Oslo Agreement to move and to travel outside and to bring books and to bring videos and so on, and to see whatever people are doing. We don't need that. Even on the internet, we can see everything we need to know. In the 70s and 80s, it was really hard for us to know what other artists were doing. That was, in a way, not so bad, because we created our own art from our culture without any influence from any other place. We had some books from the Soviet Union, like social realism. And we have a good book about Diego Rivera, that I personally was very much influenced by him. And many other Palestinian artists also were influenced by these books, but very few books.
And of course, your surroundings. You're living the occupation, and you're also living in the midst of a historic, very stunning country. So I'm sure a lot of that influenced your work and inspired your creative process.
Yes, of course. The whole thing gave us ideas all the time. We never lacked ideas, because occupation always there is something that can give you an idea to do a painting or a cartoon or an illustration. And this is a blessing for any artist, although it's hard and it's cruel and so on, but for artists, conflicts are good, because they give you incentive, they give you ideas, especially here, because it's so surrealistic, the whole idea of another people coming and taking your land and denying your existence. It's something, for modern concepts, it's really something very interesting for artists. The whole concept, the whole idea is really very, very strange.
Yeah, you are living the struggle. You're literally living.
And we are living it, yes.
Yeah.
A struggle that was in fact surreal, and is in fact surreal, because it's unfathomable if you were to speak to any normal people that you would be sitting having a nice life in your hometown, and that somebody would come in and start occupying you, and going so far as to even trying to control the art that you produce, the colors that you use, the symbols that you'd like to express yourself with. I think about movements like the Gutai movement out of Japan in the 50s, where they were, this need of self-expression and to break the barriers of what traditional Japanese art was. But here, you're stuck in an occupation that is so surreal that, it creates its own artistic world within. I can imagine. It's like you're living the actual paintings, or you're living what you're expressing. And so you have a lot of work. You don't have to go out and search for content. You have so much content. I have so much respect. I mean, I just can't, I would love to see a Hollywood film about your life. I can't imagine what it was like to be, I mean, today as an iconic Palestinian artist, to have lived the last 75 years under this brutal occupation by Israel, and yet to still be able to create these beautiful, mind-boggling, just wonderful paintings that everyone is so in awe of, out of just so much misery and trauma and control. I mean, I have so much respect for you. You are making such an impact, and you will for generations to come. There is no medium like art when it comes to expressing a people's existence.
Exactly. Thank you, Lena. You are right. Thank you. I have to speak a little bit about the new generation of artists. You know, and my age artist, we worked very hard to establish an academy of art, and Khalid Jarrar was studying there also, that deals with contemporary art and with modern mediums of expression like video, camera, and so on, and other concepts that we couldn't do when in the 70s and 80s. But there is a kind of danger that I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think the influence of the internet and whatever comes into their lives, the young artists, I think this is a kind of danger for young Palestinian artists. And there are several instances that the line between being influenced and stealing is very, very narrow. And sometimes artists, they blur this line. So there's this kind of, danger of losing your identity and your truthfulness. I don't know, but that's how I feel that. I mean, the new generation, I want to have, because, sometimes young artists, they like that old artists, they die and go away because they want to start their new life. But we as old artists, we like to see that our effort is continuing and young generations are coming and working and so on, and in this maybe the same spirit, of course, with new ideas, with new visions, because it's a new time, but still, with the same feeling, with the same.
I would imagine that it's very difficult in occupied Palestine to protect your proprietary interests, your art itself. I would imagine that would be quite easy to have a lot of copycat artists. I mean, I can only imagine that that's what's going on. It sounds like what we're addressing here. I don't know how you can protect your art. I mean, I know how to draft a cease and desist artist in case anyone copies your work, but I think it's up to us and hopefully some sort of guild, some sort of artist guild that would be looking out and making sure that the older generation of artists' works were not being copied by the new generation. And this idea that no idea is original is very controversial in the art world. But I think it's something that has to come within, the guild of the artists to really put in strong controls. I've seen many copies of your work, and it's embarrassing because I can't believe that the artists actually think that it's original. So and other artists' work as well, Orientalists.
Look,
are no longer
I have to make myself clear. I'm not saying that all young artists are doing this. Some, very few are doing, but and most of them are really original, and they have their own ideas, and I respect their work. And I'm not afraid that, and I would love that they will copy me. I'm not afraid that they will copy me. I'm afraid they will copy some New York artist, not me or not an Arab artist or whatever. But I'm afraid they will start copying someone from another culture, from another thing, That's my worry, not me. I'm not worried
Something
about
that,
my art.
really, I worry about that actually, but you're saying that you worry about them copying artists that don't have anything to do with the identity of being Palestinian, like Jeff
Exactly.
Koons, for example, somebody who actually even despises us. I see what you mean, but I feel that is happening across the world amongst all artists, not just Palestinian artists. There's this superstar.
It will happen, but I'm speaking about my concerns, and it doesn't mean that I will forbid them or I know it will happen, but that's a concern of mine. I don't like it. That's only I can say about it. But it will happen. It will happen. I know. I mean, the influence of easy art is really, it's there, and مغري. So I mean, to make a black painting that is cut in the middle by a knife or by something.
Fontana.
Fontana. It's nice and easy, but I mean, if you know the concept behind it and you read the philosophy about that and you absorb it, I don't care. It's good. But if you just see a painting in a big museum, important museum, that only black or white and there's cut inside it, and so you tell yourself, oh, art is very easy. I can do that. If you do that without reading and knowing the whole idea about that, then that's a danger, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's not even a danger. That's a danger with common people. When they see art, they see a Rothko, for example, and they say, "Oh, that's easy. I'm gonna copy it." But that's the easiest part, is to copy it. They don't know what it took for Rothko to get to that point, or what it took for Fontana. There's an entire study behind his works from that period. So no, I understand exactly. Yeah, we're in a very scary period right now when it comes to contemporary art.
Yeah.
Yes, I see exactly what you're talking about.
Circling back to your brilliant work, what do you hope resonates with people who view your art vis-a-vis Palestine?
Sometimes I get feedback from people on Instagram, young Palestinian people who were born in the United States, for example, and they tell me, your art made me, I want to come back and see Palestine. I mean, that's the maximum I want to have the influence of my art on young people and loving their Palestine and so on, and being proud of their culture. I mean, this is the maximum I want to see.
Well, I would say that, I mean, we're not only are we, should every Palestinian be proud of our culture, which has been stripped away from us, but myself as an American Palestinian, it is exactly that when we see your work. It takes us away to a world that it's a different world than the Palestine that they refuse to even accept in the United States. When we see your works, we feel like we can identify somehow, because it tells us the stories that our grandmothers told us, it's the stories that our parents told us. And so we see that in your art, and it's extremely moving for people like us on the outside. If only it were that easy to go to Palestine, but it's just beautiful work. I hope to see more and more of your work in the Western museums, and I hope to see more shows in the West, actually, because people are very fascinated about the Palestinian culture, which they haven't even heard about for the last 100 years. And it's so nice if we could have more shows. You should be, in Palais de Tokyo, and you should be at MoMA. And I mean, your work is definitely not only worthy of it, but I think the Palestinian people, it would be great for the Palestinian cause. So anything I can do to help you, I'm here for you.
Thank
And
you.
Lama in Dubai.
Thank you,
And we are so grateful to speak with you. There are so many people out there who are going to appreciate this interview because you're so incredibly loved by the Palestinians, both inside Palestine and in the diaspora. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Lina. Thank you, Lama.
Thank you for joining us this week on Free Palestine Pod. Subscribe, like, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter.
And be sure to come back next week for a new episode of Free Palestine Pod. Let's talk Palestine.